There she is. And we'll get started here in a second. Please don't judge me by how many tabs I have open. Good morning, everyone. My name is Courtney. I am the I don't want it to work. There we go. I'm the education programmer here at BC MPHA, and I'm excited to welcome our friends from Plug-in BC to talk about the EV ready retrofits in community housing. A few tech things. Please stay on mute during the actual session unless you are unmuting to ask a question, just for the ease of the recording sound. The session is going to be recorded, and it is being recorded currently, and we'll be sending this out via email to folks at the end of the session. Please feel free to use the chat, say hi, say where you're from, ask any questions or make any comments. And I'll be helping to monitor that. I don't know any of the answers to your questions, but I will be flagging it for the presenters who do. And at the end, there'll also be a formal Q&A portion where you'll be able to ask questions and engage in dialogue with our wonderful presenters, who I will now pass over to them.
Good morning, all. Thank you, Courtney, and a big thank you to the BC Nonprofit Housing Association for hosting this webinar today, and to the participants who are taking time out of their day to be here. My name is Marisara Ujo, and I'm an EV advisor at Plug-in BC. I'm joining you today from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations, who from time immemorial have been stewards of this land, this beautiful place we call home. We also encourage our participants to take a moment to acknowledge in the chat, if they like, whose traditional territories they're joining us from, and to think about how we can be better allies to our Indigenous brothers and sisters. A little bit about Plug-in BC. Plug-in BC is a program of the Fraser Basin Council. The Fraser Basin Council is a charitable nonprofit society that brings people together to advance sustainability across BC. It was established in 1997, and FBC is a collaboration of 4 orders of government, including federal, provincial, local, and First Nations, along with those from the private sector and civil society. We are actually contracted by the province's Clean BC program to provide the support for the different rebate offers. In the context of multi-unit residential buildings, or MURBs, you'll hear that abbreviation a lot today. We assist through the top. If we can ask the participants to put themselves on mute if they're not asking questions at the moment, that would be amazing. Thank you. So we assist through the process of engaging residents and decision makers to understand the steps and also how to best set themselves up to receive the rebates. We'd also like to acknowledge our other partners through this process on this webinar, as well as our research projects on barriers to EV adoption in community and Indigenous housing. Those partners are Aboriginal Housing Management Association, or AMA, Co-op Housing Federation of BC, or CHFBC, and of course our host today, the BC Nonprofit Housing Association. For the next portion of the presentation, my colleague JM will be covering this part. He's also an EV advisor, and he works as part of our on our Emotifile. Emotifile is also a program of the Fraser Basin Council, and it raises awareness of the different programs available through BC that encourage adoption through community outreach and education. I'm just going to share my screen, and over to you, JM.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And I'm currently in the traditional territories of the Musqueam on the Fraser River in South Vancouver, otherwise known as. So just to begin, because there's a lot of ground to cover and we want to not just bombard you with all this information. So please do ask away in the question and answer period, and we'll try and answer all your questions. So why are we here? First of all, Vehicle electrifications are the largest contributor to the greenhouse gas reduction strategy in our region. And we are in the process of going through probably the largest transition in mobility since the Ford Model T was made. So there's obviously, you're fully aware, I'm sure, that it's a very hot item in the news media right now. And we're in the process of really trying to shift into more electrification. So in order to do that, we have to obviously have charging in place because the vehicles do need charging. And for 30 to 70% of housing stock in Metro Vancouver, that is quite a feat. So we're really in the process of, as EV advisors, giving advice to MERBs and stratas that want to install the electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So BC has around 10,000, in I guess late 2018, we had about 10,000 EVs registered on the road, and that's gone up to well over 80,000 by the end of 2021. We, in Q1 of this year, it represented about 17% of all new light duty vehicle sales in BC. That's the highest in North America, actually, per capita. And I think we're over 20% at this point. So it's a very high percentage compared to other parts of the world, as well as the largest per capita in North America. One of the things that's assisting this are, zoning bylaws that are changing. Many municipalities are changing their codes and whatnot. So we'll get into that a little deeper as we continue. And the EV strategies are really the focus for a lot of municipalities, as well as the provincial government and the federal government moving forward. Next slide, please. So the cost of owning an EV is on the decline. So it's becoming easier to make a purchase of an electric vehicle worthwhile when you look at the cost of ownership over the time span of owning the vehicle versus just the sticker price, which is the sort of conventional approach of looking at purchasing a new vehicle. So over the last decade, battery production costs have come down by about 85%. So batteries are getting cheaper, and they're getting much better and robust. So range is really no longer an issue for newer vehicles. And this trend is going to continue in the next 5 years, ramping up very quickly and well into the future, until basically all vehicles are going electric. So the benefit of EVs is basically lowering the cost of the fuel, of course. That's the largest thing to consider. So that works out to about 20 cents per liter equivalent. It also has extremely low maintenance costs, being that there's just a battery and no moving parts. The greenhouse gas emissions levels, of course, are reduced by about 90% over the cycle of the vehicle. And in places like BC, where we have a very clean energy source, mostly water, hydroelectricity, that is significant, a significant reduction. So zero tailpipe emissions, excellent performance. They're essentially better vehicles performance-wise, very responsive, and they also reduce noise pollution. Next slide, please. So part of what's helping encourage this shift are the mandates and incentives in place at the government level. Federal government wants to have a goal, or has put in a goal of 100% EV adoption by 2035. That's quite aggressive. The same applies to other parts of the world, like in the EU. and in the US, the Biden administration claiming something similar, in California, et cetera. So this is beyond BC, but really we're focused on BC here. And most municipalities in BC now have EV-ready bylaws in place to encourage more retrofits and infrastructure for MURBs and whatnot. And thousands of dollars are now available in rebates for the purchase of vehicles as well as for putting in charging. The most important factor for EV adoption at this stage is really getting the charging in place. So even before owning an electric vehicle, the next consideration, of course, is putting the charging in. And most charging is done at home. So it's the most cost-effective and convenient form of charging. Most of it is done about 80 to 90% at home. So that's the main crux at this point, is getting charging for individuals that are charging at home. And for multi-unit family buildings, that's the biggest barrier, because it's a little more tricky to do that going through stratas and whatnot. Next. So there's basically 3 different types of charging. Basically every electric vehicle has a charger that comes with the vehicle that can just plug into any wall socket of 110. And that's what's considered AC level 1. Many homes, that's what they would be able to do. However, it's very slow. So it's only 3 to 9 kilometers of range per hour, as opposed to a level 2 station, which is what most people want when they get an EV and they put in a charger in their garage, or in the case of a MURB, inside a parkade. And that's much faster. It's 19.2 kilowatts as opposed to roughly 2, and it's about 10 to 100 kilometers of range per hour, depending on how robust the level 2 system is. And then there's something called DC fast charging. You've probably seen these on the highways and whatnot, in parking lots of Walmarts and things like that, where there's a big station and they're extremely fast stations compared to even level 2. We're talking 150 to 2,000 kilometers of range per hour. That's the famous Tesla supercharger network. That's what would be a DC charger as well. Okay, next slide. So the first steps in future proofing is gauging the demand. So conducting a survey to find out how many people in, say, a building, for a MURB example here, would benefit from putting charging in. And then to determine the electric capacity, get the load data from BC Hydro usually, or Fortis BC in some parts of BC. And then to consult an electric contractor or engineer, preferably that are certified. And yeah, they basically go through the process of determining the best fit and scenario for each parkade, in this case for MURBs.
Thank you, JM.
And I'll hand it over to you, Madise.
Thank you, that's perfect.
Yeah.
So one of the most important part of planning is equity. So equity means access for every unit in the building. In the case of multi-unit residential buildings, oftentimes you'll be working with limited electrical capacity and existing infrastructure. So the opportunity is really not there to upgrade the infrastructure in a major way by, let's say, upgrading the service and or adding additional capacity. But through research and consultation over the last few years with the industry, it's quite clear that in most cases, through an energy management system and load sharing, you can actually utilize the existing electrical capacity to give access to pretty much everyone. as long as they have a stall assigned. So of course, there's going to be different factors in every situation. So every building is different. There's a lot involved, but the best person to really guide you through this process is an electrical engineer and or a contractor who is certified in the EVITP program, which stands for Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program. So it's really important to consult people who are actually actively working in this space, and they're knowledgeable and can provide adequate design options. Because in some cases, you have to be quite aggressive in terms of that load sharing ratio in order to give access to as many people as possible. And this is something that can only be achieved by someone who's knowledgeable in this space. So some considerations, so you don't want to be just looking at meeting immediate needs. You want to think about this in terms of a 10 to 15 year mark. If we go back to BC government mandate of 90% adoption by 2030 and the federal government mandate of 100% car sales, new car sales being EVs by 2035, then this is kind of the timeline that you should be looking at, because we are progressively seeing added adoption as time goes by, and so more and more people are going to want to have access to charging. Now, certain things are definitely important to consider. Age of your building. So is your building, if you're considering a 10 to 15 year mark, and your building is, you don't foresee your building being around for more than 5 years, then that's the time where maybe you want to invest in a temporary solution. But if you foresee your building being around for the foreseeable future, you know, into that 10, 20 year mark, then you want to definitely plan holistically and future-proof your project. Of course, the existing electrical infrastructure, we touched on this, that's really, you know, important consideration for those electrical contractors and engineers. They will work with the existing electrical capacity. They will take a look at the layout of the parkade and stall proximity to electrical rooms. And then there's also your building demographics. How many people are driving? What are, you know, how far are they driving on a daily or monthly basis? So yeah, those driving habits, you know, will also determine minimum performance requirements that will go into that design consideration and planning for your projects. So what are the rebates that are offered by the Clean BC program? These are the most accessible rebates. There are also federal rebates, but they have vigorous eligibility requirements and they take a long time to process and find out whether you have been approved. So the fastest, easiest way and the most accessible are these Clean BC rebates that exist for multi-unit residential buildings. One of the requirements is that the building is obviously constructed before August 31st of 2021. And this is really, it speaks to the fact that these rebates are really addressing retrofit situations. So they're not really addressing new builds because most of the new construction is mandated to be EV ready as built. There are certain circumstances where, you know, some municipalities that don't have EV ready bylaws may fall under, you know, pre-EV ready requirements. In those cases, those buildings will qualify for the full program because they didn't have to get their permits before the EV ready bylaws were in place. And so they didn't have to build with EV ready requirements. There are 3 rebate streams. The first is the EV Ready Plan, which is the feasibility study. So it's assessment, design consideration. It includes the energy management system and it has a cost analysis component. The next portion, so EV Ready is really basically your roadmap. There's no installation at this point. It's basically just a PDF document that goes over, what's existing in the building and what is the best way to distribute power to each stall. The requirement for the EV Ready plan is that you give access on a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning one stall per unit, and or you work to 100% of your available electrical capacity. So even if it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, it's the maximum that you can implement in the building. It's not a phased approach. It's basically a one-time holistic approach to bringing in EV infrastructure into your building. The second portion of the rebate program covers the actual installation of the electrical infrastructure to bring power from the electrical room to the stall. And I'll go a little bit more into detail about what that entails and what it includes. And the last portion of the rebate program is the charger rebate, which will contribute towards the cost of an EVSE or energy supply equipment, electric vehicle supply equipment, which is your charger in the stall. You do not need pre-approval for the EV Ready plan. So as long as you do the consultation with a reputable electrical engineer or contractor, and they have drawn up the plan as per the EV Ready requirements that are posted on the utilities websites, then you just submit your EV Ready plan and your paid receipt to get the rebate. However, you do have to have pre-approval for any kind of infrastructure installation. And I'll go a little bit more into detail about that. And as for the chargers, they have to be networked level 2 chargers. So they can't be just any, dumb charger off the market, because they have to work with the energy management system. Again, we're going back to that design that encompasses giving charging access to as many people in the building as possible. And that is not possible with a dumb charger. You would have to have a network system. Chargers need to be communicating to each other, to the electrical room, to the offsite server, plus possibly to the grid. And so for that, you need a level 2 network capable smart charger. A list of eligible chargers in the program are posted on both the utilities, so Fortis Electric and BC Hydro. And we can also provide links if you need more information about those. So we talked about the EV Ready plan being the most important component of a holistic, comprehensive approach for your building. And you do really need to engage with professionals that are knowledgeable in this space. So the EV Ready plan requirements. So now this is like a 2-page document also posted on the utilities website, but short summary of what it entails. It's got your capacity assessment, minimum charging performance requirement based on your demographics, driving habits, and conditions such as climate and whether you live in a sort of like a hilly environment or is it all flat. There's design options obviously included in that, and it also has the energy management component and cost analysis. What does it mean to have an EV Ready parking stall? Basically, you have everything you need to bring power to that stall. So at some point in the future, all that organization or resident have to do is actually purchase the EVSE or the charging unit and hardwire or plug it into the wall. So it has everything from maybe in the electrical room there's an EV specific panel. There may be a sub-meter that separates electrical consumption for EV charging from the rest of the common area parkade. So you can then figure out the cost of EV charging in the building, and those who are not charging will not be responsible for paying for those who are charging. It includes conduits and wiring, and anything to install, anything that's necessary to run those cables into the infrastructure and into the layout of the building. So that could include things like scanning, coring, trenching, labor and material. It would include the junction boxes as well as the energy management system. And the energy management system, basically, there are things that are basically, it's included. One of them is monitoring and controlling EV loads. So one of the benefits of energy management system is that you can control, for example, charging during peak demand times. So you can limit charging during those times where everyone's coming home from school or work and everything is plugged in, all the appliances and electronics. And you want to avoid going into demand charging, which is something that the utilities will be charging. If they're not charging in your building now, will be charging in the future. So an energy management system allows limitations during those energy management system and can potentially limit charging to quieter times, basically. It also, includes the communication protocol. So the communication between the chargers, as I mentioned, in the load sharing scheme, where 4, 6, or 8 stalls are drawing power from one panel, and they're sharing the electrical capacity of that panel. And depending on how many cars are plugged in, the energy, the electrical capacity is getting divided by that number. And or it's possible to also do charging in intervals. So if you have more cars plugged in than the available electrical capacity, then those cars can be charging in intervals so that everyone can get some charging in an equitable way at some point during the night. It also includes, conveniences such as tracking and billing, and obviously, very important, there's going to be maintenance, troubleshooting, firmware updates. All of those things are a service that's included in the energy management system. And it's really important to acknowledge that basically enabling a comprehensive approach to charging will not be possible without an energy management system, because we're not in those scenarios, we're not working with dedicated circuits, we're always load sharing. So this is a diagram of what it looks like to have a dedicated circuit versus a load shared circuit. As you can see in the diagram to the left, those are all dedicated circuits. So basically one panel is, split 4 ways, but those circuits are not communicating to each other. And it requires a larger capacity to accommodate dedicated circuits. For example, you need a minimum of 32 or 40 amp per circuit in order to enable a dedicated circuit, whereas that 32 amp or 40 amp panel can easily power 4, 6, or 8 or even more stalls on a load shared, load managed system. Again, so here's just a summary of what is a holistic approach, a comprehensive approach versus a phased approach. So I want to talk a little bit about a phased approach. So some multi-unit residential buildings may be considering a phased approach because of lower, first cost. If they're not prepared to invest in a larger project. However, I'll go through the cons of doing a phased approach. And also I'll mention that the utilities discourage from a phased approach, and actually the rebates as they're structured now with the EV Ready plan and the EV Ready infrastructure funding, they do not fund a phased approach. So holistic approach is a 1-to-1 ratio of basically 1 stall per unit, or as many units, as many stalls as can be EV readied per your electrical capacity. There's one-time planning. It's the most convenient for the drivers to basically charge in their own stall, because it's the stall that they always park in. They don't have to move the car around. It takes 3 seconds to plug into the wall. It's got a greater upfront cost. It's a one-time cost, but a lower life cycle cost. So over, compared to a phased approach, doing it in a one go is actually going to reduce your costs by 1/3. A phased approach, so it's basically installing a few chargers at a time, and then adding as you go with, as adoption increases. However, planners must go back to the table again and again as adoption grows. So it's more labor intensive. It's basically a retrofit again and again. You'll have to mobilize contractors, for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 chargers, which is a limited project. The cost is actually 2 to 3 times more. So on average, the cost of installing one EVSE without the holistic approach is about $7,000 to $8,000. That cost is about $1,900 to $2,400 if you're doing it as part of the holistic, EV ready approach. And then also the planning can be affected, because if you're doing a few at a time, the first adopters may actually take up most of the available electrical capacity, which means that either you're not going to have capacity in the future as adoption grows, or you may have to leave some assets stranded to basically accommodate more people in the future. And then, yes, there's a lower first cost, but in terms of economy of scale, it's a higher cost per instance and a higher life cycle cost. So the rebate program, let's talk about numbers a little bit. What does it cover? The EV Ready plan covers up to 75% of the cost of the plan, up to a maximum of $3,000. Again, no pre-approval required. The EV Ready infrastructure plan was recently increased from $80,000 to $120,000. So $80,000 used to cover about 133 stalls in a complex. The $120,000 will now cover up to about 200 stalls at $600 a stall, or 50% of the cost, whichever is less. You do need pre-approval for this. The EVSE or charger rebate, which is the last portion, basically is if you're combining it with the EV Ready infrastructure rebate at $600 a stall, you'll be qualified for $1,400 per EVSE, or 50% of the cost, up to a maximum of $14,000. And if you're not combining it with the EV Ready plan and infrastructure, and you're just doing the standalone charger, you'll be eligible for up to $2,000 per single port charger, or up to $4,000 per dual port charger. Again, up to 50% of the cost, whichever is less, and up to $14,000 a building per year. So what I'd like to reiterate here is that that $2,000, if you're doing a standalone charger, again, if you remember, the cost of installing one or a few chargers is at about $7,000 to $8,000 per charger. So that $2,000 is not going to go very far. Whereas when you're combining it in a holistic approach and having an EV ready plan and infrastructure installed, then that cost comes down significantly to about a third. So there is some indication of Fortis BC offer. BC Hydro for 3 months offer the same, but they have depleted those funds. So now they're back to the original limits. In Fortis BC, they're still going through the funds. So there's a bit more available in Fortis territory. So the EV infrastructure rebate, as we discussed, you need an EV ready plan as a prerequisite, at least 1 parking space per dwelling, junction boxes specific to EV charging, electrical permits, inspections, the back-end infrastructure for the EV electric vehicle management, energy management systems, and then also the performance requirements as part of that planning. So what are the typical costs of having an EV ready plan? They typically range between, so depending on the size of your building and the actual, layout, age, existing infrastructure, they can range from about, $2,500 to $3,000 to about $6,000 for the larger marks. The Clean BC Rebate Program covers up to 75%, but maxes out at $3,000. So the cost usually it's, depending on the size of your building, it might be, $1,000 to $2,000 in most cases after the rebate. The EV charging infrastructure, so through consultation with the industry, that number has, for the last 3 years, really been hovering around $1,200 a stall when you're doing it as a comprehensive approach. And the rebate program covers up to 50%, which is $600 a stall. So if you're looking at a range of about $1,000 to $1,500, per stall, then your cost after the rebates around, $600 to $900 in most cases. This number, however, is maybe a slightly different with the inflation rate that's currently in place, but it's hovering around that. So when you do speak to contractors and our engineers, if they quote you, $3,000, $4,000 a stall, that's way off the ballpark. That's where you need to go back to the drawing table and consult other contractors and engineers and basically shop around. With the EVSEs or charger costs, basically that ranges for a smart charger between $1,500 and $5,000 on the very high end, and you get about 50% of that back, up to a maximum of $1,400 per charger. So it's important to note that you do not have to install EVSEs or chargers in every parking stall right now. You're not going to have, not everybody's going to be driving EVs for, in the near future. There may be some people in your buildings that already have adopted EVs or are waiting to receive theirs. They've ordered it, they're waiting to receive it. Those people may need to have a charger installed. However, for those who are still thinking or considering EVs and or are planning to adopt a little bit further into the future, you don't have to install chargers for those stalls. Obviously, you can wait. The point of the EV Ready is that the infrastructure is there so that the chargers can go in at some point in the future. And also, it's important to note that the costs are obviously have to be paid upfront. The rebates are received after you've paid for everything and submitted your final documents. I'll stop there. There are some more information around energy management system, networking fees. I'm sure there's questions around that from the audience. I'm just going to open it up. And perhaps Courtney, our moderator, can maybe let us know what are some of those questions that people may be having.
Absolutely. So I'm just scrolling to the top of the chat here. There was a little bit of like conversation happening that I noticed JM kind of already jumped in and responded to. But one question is this program relevant for those who build affordable housing in the East Kootenays?
Yeah, so the East Kootenays, I believe, is in Fortis Electric territory. They are part of this program, and they still are taking advantage of the additional ZEVIT funding that our Clean BC program received. And so there's additional funding available to them, and definitely this program is available across BC. So they can take advantage of the rebates as well as our advisory services through Plug-in BC.
Awesome. And then we had a question from Sophia. For the design and capacity, do you also consider other future demands to electrify? For example, heat pumps for hot water and cooling.
So this is a conversation that you probably need to have with your electrical engineer or contractor. If there is limited capacity in your building, there might be other areas where they can take a look at more efficiency in your building that can open up additional capacity. Those initiatives that you mentioned being one, changing lighting to the LED being others. There are a number of things that you can be doing. You can include it in your planning and your assessment if you choose to.
And then there was a couple of questions from a couple of different folks around why level 1 chargers are not included in the rebates.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very good question. So as we touched on it, level 1 charging is not an efficient way of charging. It takes a long time. It actually loses about 30% of energy as charging goes from, let's say, the wall to the car. So it's not efficient. And also oftentimes it's on a dedicated circuit. So as we mentioned, dedicated circuits cannot be load shared and load managed. And there's not enough electrical capacity in, let's say, a building to give level 1 charging to everyone. So it actually is less efficient than level 2 charging, even though you think it's counterintuitive because it requires 120 volt versus a 240 volt, but it's not load shared, load managed. That's why it's not included in the program.
Yeah, and just to continue that, and as an owner of an EV myself, essentially level 1 chargers come with the vehicles. So most OEMs have a level 1 charger, at the time of purchase, and that's mostly to be used, when you're over at somebody else's home and you can plug into an outlet and whatnot. But if you're a commuter that is requiring the distance in a daily commute, it's highly inconvenient to be charging that long at a level 1 charger versus a level 2. And then you would basically need to be charging at a DC charging as well. I think, as Patrick correctly mentioned, that there's, plug-in hybrids, which have a much smaller battery, where, even level 1 charging is sufficient to charge a much smaller battery. But what we're seeing as an industry trend is that the batteries are obviously getting much larger and much more powerful and require more power to recharge.
Thank you, JM. Courtney, do we have additional questions?
Yes, I lost where I was in the chat. Is from Gail. Is there a funding program that includes the installation of a limited number of chargers that would require residents to have a charge card for charging?
So yes, the last stream of the funding, which is the standalone charger rebate, which, as I mentioned, if you're just doing the standalone charger, you get up to $2,000 per charger, or up to per single port charger, or $4,000 per dual port charger, up to a 50% of the cost, whichever is less. But as I mentioned, the cost of those projects typically are 2 to 3 times higher because you're not getting the economy of scale. So there are, buildings that do opt to have just a few shared chargers, let's say in visitor parking, for example, that is to be shared by all residents. It's likely going to meet your immediate needs, but when you think about future needs, it's going to be inconvenient, because what's going to happen is if it's not, if you have just installed a few chargers, you have taken away from the total available electrical capacity in your building to accommodate those chargers, which if they're not efficiently used, that means later on you'll have trouble adding chargers based on your electrical capacity. The other part of that is the inconvenience factor. So most charging would have to, you need about between 2 to 4 hours to charge, like 2 to 3 times a day. 2 to 3 times a week. However, then you have to police people actually moving their car out of those stalls, as per your time limit of charging, so that it can be fair and equitable to as many people as possible. And you kind of have to disregard charging during the night, because, between the hours of 11 p.m. and 6 a.m., nobody's going to move their car. So that's the other thing. It may, like I said, it can meet immediate demands. It might be, in some cases, it might be the only option, because there's just not either the capacity or the drive to accommodate a larger scope project. But over the life cycle of having to electrify a building, it's going to cost more, like I said, 2 to 3 times the actual cost of doing a holistic approach. And it may leave assets stranded in the future, and also mean that you are working with limited capacity for further adoption.
Yeah, so that underlines the importance of the network charging that's in place for the program. And part of that is, as Madis mentioned, making the billing feature, and then and just to know what the consumption is for each individual or vehicle that's charging. And this will be increasingly important as the low carbon credits become more of an attractive option for buildings. And so carbon credits are available for any EV charging available, and it will be necessary to register and report the consumption in each building for each individual charger. And this applies to public chargers as well. So essentially, the more the chargers are used, the more credits buildings will be able to obtain. So that's a really important feature to highlight when buildings are considering putting level 2 charging into their buildings.
Yeah, and Gail, yes, of course you can have, if shared chargers are what ends up happening in your buildings. There's definitely swipe cards or apps where people can basically have their own account that they can get charged for their usage. So you won't have to. I'll touch a little bit on, actually, this is a good junction to touch a little bit about costs. So with regards to how much does it cost to have charging in your own stall, there's 2 costs that are associated with that. One is the network service fee that's paid to the network service provider that manages the energy management system. And the other one is to the utility service provider that provides the electricity for the building. But all in all, that cost is about $50 a month per user, about half and half. So 25 going to, let's say, the utility service provider for electricity, and 25 going to the network service provider. But when you compare that to the cost of driving a traditional ICE vehicle, internal combustion engine vehicle, you're paying, you know, hundreds of dollars in price of gas in a month. So that's something that your users, your residents will be saving on when they, you know, once adoption has taken place. You know, as I said, there's a host of services that is provided through the energy management system. And of course, some network service providers can, let's say, augment their monthly user fee to include the cost of electricity, to collect that on behalf of the you know, property management company and or MERB or strata or, you know, community housing, and then accumulate that cost and pay it back to that entity to then pay their electricity bill. In some cases, some buildings have opted to also charge, like, let's say, a flat fee for electricity for anybody who uses that, but that's not the most fair option because people have different, you know, size vehicles, different size batteries, different driving habits. Somebody might be driving from Vancouver to Chilliwack on a daily basis. Another person might just be going to the grocery store. So that's a conversation you want to have with your electrical contractor and or engineer as to, you know, which energy management system and network service provider to go with that can assist you with some of those calculations.
Yeah, it should be added that Measurement Canada has been working on a basically universally accepted metric of calculating the consumption on charging, and currently it's basically driven by time, based on the fact that we're still waiting on Measurement Canada to come up with their kilowatt hour, which is a much more effective way, and that's basically how you know, BC Hydro or FortisBC bills are associated with kilowatt hours. So the consumption of electricity versus the time you spend charging. So we're getting there. We're just waiting on kind of the bureaucratic side of government just devising an acceptable universal metric of consumption that will be coming hopefully in the next year.
Yes.
Could I ask a question then, follow up to my original
Sure.
question? So when you have the individual charger in us, or when you have the charger in an individual stall, so then would that be charged to the person who owns that or who uses that stall? Like, is that how it's paid for by that person then? That goes on their electrical bill for that month or whatever?
It does not go to the electrical bill of that person because it's not linked to their, you know, residential meter.
Okay.
In most cases, it's not logistically possible to link the stall to the residential meter. One, because the residential meter is charged at a residential rate, and the stall will be part of the common area electricity bill, which is usually billed at a small, medium, or large service level, which is a commercial rate. Also logistically, it's not possible to, in like 95% of the cases, it's not possible to route where that you know, stall is to the house meter of that unit. And the other portion of that is, if you do that, then you're not utilizing the load sharing and load management, because what you have to do is to connect to one meter, you have to put it on a dedicated circuit so that it calculates only that circuit's consumption. So it's not connected to one meter. It's oftentimes connected to a sub meter that's off the main common area meter, which is calculating the electrical usage for all of the EV charging in the building. And then within that, based on the consumption of that stall, which would be like a percentage of the whole, then it's sort of like an estimated calculation of what is that individual's use of electricity in that stall. Does that make sense, Gail?
Yes, thank you very much.
Right. There was another question. Oh, lost it again. A question from Edwin. Are the energy management system's load sharing strategies voiding any of the warranties of the electric vehicle?
Not to my knowledge.
No. In a word, no. But yeah, no, that's not a concern. I mean, basically, you know, once an electrical contractor procures the equipment, you know, obviously it would have to be certified. It would have to be CUL certified as a manufacturing certification that's recognized here in Canada. So that's the main thing to determine. And most of the chargers the network charger solutions that electrical contractors and engineering firms make available to multi-unit residential buildings, you know, have that manufacturing certification. So that's the important piece, but it does not have any impact on the warranty of the OEM or the car manufacturer.
Another question from Edwin. If we have an EV ready plan, which is suggesting about $1,800 per stall for the infrastructure part only, is that reasonable?
It's a little bit above the estimated cost that the utilities point to, which is, as I mentioned, it's in the 1,000 to 1,500 range, which median point of that being 1,200, and then the midway of that being 600 that they cover. So it's not totally it's possible that your building may have, you know, more rigorous needs in terms of how to set up this infrastructure, but I'd also you know, go back to that contractor and engineer to check with them what is the ratio that they're, you know, allocating to each stall in terms of either kilowatt hour or amperage, and maybe they need to be more aggressive in their load sharing, load management in order to bring that price down. I hope that answers your question.
Then we have a question from Adrian. Is changing the power source in garages part of the rebate program? Most old buildings have old basic power systems and something with more power is required.
No, it's not part of the rebate program. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, upgrading service levels and or in, you know, swapping transformers is not part of the rebate program. And they have actually, through research, indicated that you can, in most cases, you can work with the existing infrastructure and a service level with, you know, load sharing and load management through an energy management system without having to make those costly upgrades. So my suggestion would be to speak to different engineers to just make sure that you are actually fully aware of what is the capability of your current infrastructure and how can you spread that further.
And then a question from Edwin, how does battery storage come to play into any of this?
I would need to have like that person expand on their question. I'm not sure what battery storage, like in terms of like manufacturers battery storage or
I think they may mean the amount of storage that's in the battery that's unused. So there's a very compelling compelling advances within the industry in charging that will eventually be able to tap into the vehicle's battery and be sent back to the utility. So it's called vehicle to grid technology, or vehicle to building technology, and this will be increasingly important when that technology matures. It's not quite there yet, although if you caught the Super Bowl last year, that the Ford F-150 Lightning made quite a big deal about how you could power your house with your plugged-in pickup vehicle in your garage. So I think if that's what you mean as far as battery storage, it's definitely something that is being looked at very, very thoroughly and developed in the charging market right now. So yeah, eventually we're going to get to a point where we're actually, for all the unused stored electricity that's in the batteries in just a parked vehicle, you'll be able to allow the utility to purchase that. So in the long run, it'll be a great way, especially during peak demand periods in the late evening or the evening period, for the utility to be able to get that stored parked car energy and use it to power the grid.
Yeah, so it'll come to play basically in the future where, the utilities really have to be super efficient with their grid management. But we're not quite there yet. And not everybody's charging right now, but if everybody was charging in their stall, we'd probably be looking at that.
Yeah, great question.
All right. And then a question from Leslie. Where this is outdoor parking, covered parking stalls for the tenants, is it possible to prevent any random users from pulling up and connecting to a charging outlet of a tenant? Or is anybody able to connect and use that charging outlet?
Yes, so you can, those, EVSEs are oftentimes activated by a swipe card and or an app, and you can limit access to specific users. So that should not be a problem.
Yeah. Once again, the importance of network charging, so that you have, whoever is managing the charging in the building, has the ability to, ensure that the users, have their own individual cards or what have you, so that the consumption is closely monitored and each person using each charger is identified.
Awesome. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat, but they may have gotten mixed in. There's a lot of discussion around level 1 versus level 2. So if I didn't see it, please let us know. You're welcome to unmute and ask your question, or if there's any new ones that have popped up, feel free to ask now.
Oh, was there one from Leslie, the last one there?
That was the one. Yeah, that was our most.
Okay, that was the most responsive.
So if there are no other questions, I mean, we still do have some time, but if something comes to mind, but, just want to also share our contact. If you have any questions that you have that you weren't able to ask, you can always email us at pluginbc, evadvisor@pluginbc.ca. There are plenty of resources on our website. I have mentioned some of them in the slide. We have a MERP guide, which really speaks thoroughly to the process and reasoning and logistics of how to bring in electric vehicle infrastructure and encourage adoption in your building. We have a frequently asked questions document. We have a document explaining different user fee structures. There's a survey in terms of just gauging interest in your building and sort of tapping into what are people's plans of adoption, so that you can then have indications of what are your timelines and what is the scope that you want to take on. Usually these surveys have like very few questions, 2 or 3 or 4. And we have a template that you can modify as you see fit with your own building demographics and needs. There's also a request for proposal document or template, which can be used to basically, once you have an EV ready plan, if you want to put it to tender for different contractors to bid on, this is kind of like something that you can use. We also have a contractor vetting question document where, if you're, shopping around for who can do this and what is their level of expertise and what is the scope of the projects they've done, these are the questions that you can be asking. As I mentioned, these are just a few of the resources we have on our website. We really encourage you to really explore what we have on there. We have basically dedicated hours and hours of what has come up for our clients throughout our interactions with them over the last 4 years, and sort of compiled them into different documents that can help you throughout your process.
And if I could just plant the seed for any buildings or managers that are looking at, why they should be looking at EV charging at this stage in the game. I think it's important to view it as an amenity at this point, because we have to anticipate that, we're moving very quickly towards 100% adoption. And the more ready and the more prepared buildings are at this stage, when we're really just getting to a tipping point, the better, because the rebates are available now. We don't know if they will be in the near future or, future down the road. So now that they are available, it's a really good time to be in that position where you are prepared and you are willing to consider EV charging as an amenity, even if the people in most of the stalls don't have electric vehicles for the time being. So that's the only thing that I would really encourage people to think about, maybe out of the box a little bit. It's not how many people actually own the vehicles now. It's anticipating that there will be 100% adoption in the foreseeable future. And if you're looking, 5-10 years from now, the roads will be very different than they are right now. And BC is already ahead. So yeah, that's just something to consider.
Good point, JM. And also, there's a reason why these rebates are in place. It's to push adoption. And if you look at the scope of the rebates, they went from, $14,000 a building to now $136,000 that you can qualify to be eligible for, as well as other rebates like the federal rebate and the, vehicle rebates and the public charger rebates, all of these, and the fleets rebates. And, it just goes on and on. The different levels of government's initiatives that are actually pushing adoption. So this is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Everybody's going to be adopting. And the other thing that I want to mention in terms of timelines, so a couple of caveats there. This is not a process that you can, complete in, 2 to 3 months. Be patient with the process, give yourselves grace. This is often something that can take, 9 months to a year. In some cases, it's taken some multi-unit residential buildings 2 to 3 years to implement, but you want to get started on the process. The EV Ready Plan is a really good way to get into it, because it's kind of your roadmap, and it's not a huge investment. It kind of gives you a feeling for what you need in your building. How are you going to get from here to that 2035 year where all the vehicles sold in Canada are going to be zero emission vehicles. And then other point to the the timeline is once you do submit an application for a rebate, in the case of the EV Ready plan, it's not immediate. So the utilities have 90 days to process that application and pay the rebate. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. Also, whether or not you're pre-approved, it takes 30 days. So when you submit your pre-approval application, the utilities have up to 30 days to give you a yay or a nay. And then you have, from the time that you have the pre-approval, you have 6 months to complete that project. So it's not something that you can just like set aside. You kind of have to mobilize on it. If you have applied for pre-approval, you've got to take it on and, you know, sign that contract and get started on the process. And again, when that installation is completed, you have at the end of that 6 months, and you submit your final documents. Again, those can be revised electrical drawings of the building, permits and inspections, receipts of the work. Those things, once they're submitted, the utilities have again 90 days to process that rebate and pay back the building, if that makes sense.
I think Edwin was asking about flow chargers. Yeah, so that's one of the companies that does make network chargers. There's also ChargePoint, you may have heard of.
And Switch.
Switch.
Mm-hmm. So ChargePoint is an American company. Flow and Switch are Canadian. Flow, they manufacture their 90% of their products in Canada, I believe.
That's debatable.
Yeah, so a large portion, let's just say, is getting manufactured in Canada there. So you might, so this is the other caveat you want to keep in mind. You want to consider energy management systems and chargers and network service providers that are kind of tested and true. There are a lot of new players in the market. We don't know about their longevity. You want to go with someone whose products and or services are going to be around for the foreseeable future, and they're not going to basically go out of business. So those are just some things to discuss with your electrical contractor and engineer.
Yeah, I would say, you know, as I mentioned before, the certification, the CUTL stamp is really important. And, you know, any reputable company that's doing an installation for a multi-unit residential building should have the knowledge and the experience to be able to do that, and to ensure that they are networked and not, as Mehdi's called it, dumb chargers, that don't have the ability to, you know, basically monitor the consumption. That's going to be even more important moving forward, as I mentioned, with the low carbon credits that will be available.
All right, I'm not seeing any other questions pop up in the chat.
So one last thing that I want to mention is that we're currently conducting a research project to find out about specific barriers in community and Indigenous housing. There are already a number of barriers in multi-unit residential buildings in terms of access, equity, you know, getting the vote, a yes vote from the majority. But on top of that, there are additional barriers in community and Indigenous and or marginalized housing. So we want to find out what those barriers are so that we can come up with solutions. We are working on a report that will be published March of next year. This is actually a grant that Plug-in BC or Fraser Basin Council, together with our partners, applied for through the BC Housing Building Excellence Research and Education Grant. We have our research assistant, Ms. Durrani Amplu, who's on the call with us today, assisting with that research. And we have actually came up with 2 surveys, one for the individuals and one for organizations that work with individuals in community and Indigenous housing. So that could be property managers and or other equity organizations that we'd love for you to participate and complete, so that we can have as much data as we can possibly get around what are specific barriers in your community. And I'm happy to, either myself or Courtney will post a link to those 2 surveys, and also it will be included in the follow-up email that you receive from Courtney with the link to recording, as well as other resources.
Yeah, and just a note on the affordability piece, recognizing that is probably the largest barrier right now. That the accessibility and the affordability of the electric vehicles that are currently on the market are obviously out of reach for a number of mid-income, lower income people or consumers, and that will obviously not be the case in the foreseeable future. So that's why I think at this stage in the game, it's really important to focus on the readiness for when it does, because there will be a mad rush once the vehicles become more affordable, and at the front end of the actual purchase of the vehicles. So that's why it's really that we try to encourage for the infrastructure to at least be in place for the charging, so that when people are ready, they can actually do the last little bit and put the charger on the existing infrastructure and wiring that's in place, so that once they do receive the vehicle, if they're waiting for it, it's ready, and then they can start charging as soon as they drive it home for the first day.
We had one last question from Stefan in the chat. Where do you find the EV experienced and reputable contractors that can create the EV ready plan?
So each of the utilities, they have a referral page that we can provide you links to, or you can Google or search on the utilities website yourself. Plug-in BC also has compiled a list of contractors that we have vetted for their competency, which we're happy to provide, and it's also listed on our website. But we can't really quite recommend anybody because that wouldn't be fair. So you still have to, as I mentioned, do your own vetting, and those vetting questions can really come in handy. They are also available on our website. The other side of that is with the utilities referral. Sometimes utilities refer you to somebody from their electrical alliance list, and that person may or may not necessarily have the expertise in EV infrastructure and larger scope projects. So you do have to do some vetting, despite what is out there, recommended, or you can speak to people who have done projects such as this and find out, who have they, who do they reach out. You'll have to do a bit of shopping around, if that makes sense.
Awesome. I'm not seeing any more questions. And I thank you again for all of this awesome information and the links. Please know it was mentioned before that this has been recorded and will be sent out to you in the next couple of days once we do the edits of all of the pauses at the beginning, and make it into a usable link. It'll be emailed out to you, as well as these links to the survey and any other resources that our facilitators mentioned today. So look forward to sending that all out to you. And thank you for a lively chat and so many questions and an engaged group. It always makes the time fly by. And thank you again to our lovely facilitators for sharing their expertise and knowledge with us this morning.
We'd also like to thank you, Courtney, for facilitating and thank BC and PHA once again, and our partners at AMA and Co-op Housing Federation of BC. And thank you again for all the participants for their lovely questions and for being here and interested in this process.
Awesome.
Thanks very much, everybody.